Hey, friends. Today's topic, breaking free from others' expectations to discover your true calling, is absolutely one of my favorite things to talk about because, just like all of us, it is complex and nuanced. Each of us has our own ideas about what our true calling is. And while many of us believe we have one, we don't necessarily know what it is or how to find it. A lot of people believe that it's almost like a process of elimination. They can't tell you exactly what their true calling is, but what they can absolutely tell you is whatever they're doing now is not it. However, one of the things that I really want to talk about in this live stream is, first of all, does everybody have a true calling? Because if that's not true, then the whole process of trying to find it is never going to be successful. So, I want to talk about whether there is such a thing as a true calling. Does everybody have one? And how do you figure it out? I have seen a number of people literally blow up their career and their life repeatedly because they fall in love with something, a career path, a specific choice of how they want to execute in that career, a specific role, a specific industry. And when it fails to reach their expectations, they burn it down and they start over somewhere else. So, this discussion is really all about expectations, others and our own. As I always say, it depends. Now, this particular live stream is kind of piggybacking on this week's episode of the Driven Woman Entrepreneur podcast, as are all of the live streams. But this one is going to have a little bit more personal information and a little bit more information about trends that I've seen in my business with the people that I work with. So, for the specifics of this episode of the Driven Woman Entrepreneur podcast, my conversation was with Jessica Lackey. Jessica and I met through a membership program that we're both in. And as soon as I heard about her, I was both curious and intimidated. Now, I am not easily intimidated. In fact, I rarely think of myself as intimidated by anyone. Not that I'm not impressed with others, not that I don't have like admiration and maybe even be a little bit awestruck by others, but intimidated, I've worked a lot on that. So I was a little surprised that I felt a little bit intimidated by what I heard about Jessica because she is a Harvard educated. She has an MBA from Harvard, and most people would be either impressed or intimidated by that, not just me. She also had a very successful career as a consultant at the top rated consulting firm, McKinsey. And after that, she had a very successful career at a top rated corporation, one that happened to be in my former backyard. I used to live in Portland. And the company I'm talking about is Nike. So before I even met her, I knew that this is a woman with a Harvard MBA who had a successful career at McKinsey and a successful career at Nike. And then she burned it all down and started her own business. So obviously, I was curious and a little intimidated. Now, I'm no slouch. I have a master's degree from UCLA and a track record of success as an entrepreneur and in both corporate and nonprofit and academic settings. But something about that Harvard MBA plus the McKinsey plus the Nike, I'm like, ooh, I literally had the thought, "This lady's out of my league." And when I realized I was having that thought, I realized I have to talk to her. I have to reach out to her, and I have to test my own assumptions about who she is based on her pedigree. Now, this is one of the things that I think is so important on this subject of other people's expectations, because I guarantee you, Jessica Lackey probably experiences that all the time. People thinking, oh, wow, because of her professional pedigree, they are predisposed to think of her in a particular way and predisposed to have expectations of her that look a certain way. Now, the interesting thing about Jessica's story, and if you want to listen to the entire interview, I strongly recommend it because the level of honesty, the level of authenticity, the level of candor, the level of vulnerability, and genuine intimacy in that conversation between two women who really didn't know each other very well is something I'm impressed by and something I'm proud of because it takes a little courage to do that, especially when you have been subjected to the weight of other people's expectations your whole life. Now, I'm going to say a couple more things about the interview because I really want you to listen to it. And then I'm going to go deeper into this topic of how we deal with other people's expectations, how we deal with our own expectations, and how the heck are we supposed to figure out what our true calling is based on all that. Both Jessica Lackey and I were identified as gifted in elementary school, and both of us interpreted that to mean a lot's going to be expected of me. If the way my brain works is a gift, then I'm going to have to deliver. I'm going to have to be better, think better, do better, produce better. I mean, it's the perfect formula for an overachiever. And both of us got that message loud and clear. Now, nobody probably said it to us. I certainly don't remember that, and neither does she, but that was the interpretation. And I work with a lot of gifted women, and nearly all of them interpreted it the same way. So, people who are gifted are probably more prone to being influenced by the expectations of others. But you don't have to be gifted to be influenced by that. As a matter of fact, one of the books that I recommend a lot when I'm helping a business owner identify their strengths, identify their zone of genius, right size their business, set healthy boundaries, and work in a way that feels right to them is knowing their tendency. This comes from the book, The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Now, the majority of people are what Gretchen Rubin calls obligers. 42%. That's a lot. That's definitely the majority. So if 42% of all people are obligers, what does that mean? Well, obligers hate letting other people down. So they let themselves down instead. Obligers will do what's asked of them and then some. They'll often volunteer to do more than what is asked of them. They can be very helpful to others and sometimes exploited by others because their driver when it comes to expectations is they want to meet other people's expectations, even at the expense of their own. Obligers are the backbone of society, and obligers are the backbone of all businesses. We need people to care a lot about other people's expectations of them because otherwise, everybody would do the minimum, clock out at exactly 8 hours, and go have a life. But every business, every organization depends on the majority of people being obligers, meaning they do what is expected of them because it would be excruciating to them to let others down, even if they don't like the people, even if they think their boss is a complete tool, they don't want to let him or her down. So it's really helpful to know if you happen to be an obliger. Now, let's take a theoretical example of a person who has been conditioned as a female, which means to say, to seek others' approval, to be a good girl, to do what we're told, to seek permission before we do anything we haven't been told to do, to basically, women are conditioned to be people pleasers. And many of us are also perfectionists. So you add to that someone being an obliger and someone being gifted. And what you have is a recipe for a woman who is always going to over deliver, who is always going to be a major contributor, who is always going to give too much, work too much, never say no, and basically put herself on the path to burnout. Now, in our podcast interview, I did not talk to Jessica Lackey about being an obliger, but she pretty much told me that she was because of the choices that she made. She believed that to whom much has been given, much is expected. My words, not hers. So she produced, and she produced at the highest level possible. And of course, the companies that she worked for loved that about her. And no matter what she contributed, they always wanted, expected, and encouraged her to do more. And she did. Of course, she burned out. I think it's actually fortunate that before the age of 40, even, that she did burn out, because it's a sad thing when the best and brightest women spend their whole career life seeking to meet the expectations of others without ever stopping to think, what are my expectations for myself? There isn't enough bandwidth to do both, quite honestly. So we are either seeking the approval of others, permission from others to meet the expectations of others as our prime directive, or we seek to meet our own expectations first. Now, it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think the people that are most satisfied with their careers are people who very strategically, very deliberately, very intentionally define, declare, and decide what their expectations of themselves are. And then find a role, find a job, find a career path, find a company, find an industry, or create a business where they can deliver on that. That's goodness of fit. Now, to my early point in this discussion, does everybody even have a true calling? Is that even an appropriate expectation that we can have of ourselves to find what our true calling is? I mean, what if it doesn't exist? What if your true calling— hey there, thanks for joining me. What if your true calling is a myth? What if the notion of your true calling, your purpose, what you're here for— there's lots and lots of names for it. What if it is exactly the same thing as this notion of a soulmate, one true love? Hey, Abby, if it's the same thing as a soulmate or one true love, you could literally spend your entire career chasing that outcome and never finding it because perhaps it doesn't exist. Perhaps it doesn't exist. And I believe, based on my own experience and the hundreds of women I have worked with who have either climbed the corporate ladder, climbed the ladder in academia, climbed the ladder in the nonprofit world, or started their own business, that most of us have far too many gifts, talents, skills, and abilities for there to be one true calling. I think seeking that one perfect thing can end up not only destroying a good thing, but also put you on a path of always striving and never feeling satisfied. What if a more realistic approach than finding your true calling? I don't even like the expression finding your true calling because it almost makes it seem like it's a scavenger hunt that it's out there, you just have to find it. I don't believe that. I know I used to believe it. And true story here, because I believed it, I changed companies every 2 to 3 years. I changed industries, and I changed career paths multiple times, which meant starting over from the bottom. That, over time, takes a tremendous toll in so many ways. And at the end of the day, another expression I'm not too fond of, but I sometimes use, what would have served me so much better is this: to balance meeting other people's expectations with meeting my own expectations and crafting a career based on the utilization of my innate gifts and strengths in such a way that it could evolve over time. Because the notion of a true calling, the notion of a perfect path, the notion that there's one thing out there that you are uniquely suited to doing can end up expending an enormous amount of effort and always feeling like close but no cigar. "Oh, I thought this was the one. Guess not. Well, I better go start over somewhere else." Instead, knowing who you are, knowing how you are, knowing what your strengths and limitations are, knowing how much change you like, how much risk you're comfortable with, how much creativity you can bring, and crafting a path that allows you to evolve. One of the reasons why I chose social work for 20 years of my career was that under that umbrella, I was able to do many different things. I could create and run programs. I could supervise and develop people. I could provide direct services. So I was able to move along a path that I continued to evolve. This notion that there's one thing that you can do, that you should do, you just have to figure it out, I don't believe it's true. Now, you do need to know who you are. You do need to know what you're good at. You do need to know what you enjoy doing so much, you probably do it for free. Figure out a way to get paid for that. Now, there's a mindset piece that you need to do when you're doing that. So many people who have innate abilities, innate gifts, strengths, talents, if you will, don't value those things. They take them for granted. They think, for example, I enjoy public speaking. It comes naturally and easily to me. But most people hate it. In fact, it's been said that most people fear public speaking more than death. Shocking. They would rather die than get up in front of people and talk. So, doesn't it just make sense that since I enjoy it and it comes easily and naturally to me, that I should incorporate that into whatever I do? Same with you. Maybe you're really good at pattern recognition. Maybe you're really skilled at emotional intelligence. Maybe you are a genius at creating simplicity from complexity. That's an innate ability that can be applied to any number of career paths. But what do most of us do instead? Most of us, starting from a very early age, listen to what other people tell us we're good at, starting with parents and teachers. And this is no shade on parents and teachers. Okay. I have three children. I've done these things too. We reflect back to our children what we think they're good at. And because young children are developmentally wired to seek our approval, those messages land really hard for them. I can't tell you how many people I have worked with in my career, first as a therapist and later as a business strategist and coach, who went into a field they were really not suited for and didn't like because of a parent's expectations, because of cultural expectations. People from our particular cultural group go into these fields, and maybe you want to go into this field. So something that I think we all need to take responsibility for is, how do we want to manage other people's expectations? Do we want to spend our life seeking permission from other people to do what we want to do? Seeking approval from others for doing what they want us to do? Or attempting to craft a path for ourselves that meets our own expectations and allows us to meet enough expectations of others that we can make a sustainable living from it? Well, you can tell that's not, it is a rhetorical question. Obviously, that's what I think we should do. Now, it's not as simple as waking up and realizing, oh, I'm not doing what I should be. I have, in the words of Jessica Lackey, I am climbing a ladder that is leaning against the wrong wall. Okay, that's a painful moment. That can be a wake up call. It can be a rude awakening, depending on how long you've been climbing and how much you've invested in that ladder. Many people need to be in their midlife years before they hit that inflection point and they say, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. This is especially true for women. You know, the proverbial midlife crisis. There's a lot of reasons for it. But if you realize your ladder is leaning against the wrong wall, before you take that ladder and go place it elsewhere and end up possibly doing what Jessica Lackey did and talks about extensively and very vulnerably in the interview, she came to the conclusion that being a consultant was not the right path for her. She still didn't understand that she needed to create her own business in order to be doing something that is truly authentic for her. So she took that ladder and she leaned it against the Nike wall. So she went from succeeding as a consultant to succeeding in the corporate world. She came to the same conclusion, not based on failure, based on success. And this is something I really want to make a point of. A lot of people feel they can't leave the path they're on unless they're failing at it. That the only reason to stop doing what you're doing is because it's not working. This is the typical thinking for most humans across all things. For example, most people wouldn't leave a marriage that's technically working, that's technically functional, but they're like dead man walking in. They're not thriving. They're just existing. Most people wouldn't leave that. Most people won't leave a career path if it's functional, if it's technically working, because of the sunk cost fallacy and other people's expectations. Being able to grapple with the reality that you may have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in an education to become a physician, let's say, or to get an MBA from Harvard, like Jessica, or a law degree from a prestigious school, only to realize this is not what I want to do. This feels so effortful and exhausting, and I'm getting no satisfaction from it. Man, that's a hard pill to swallow. But it does happen. I've seen it many times. And if you've invested a lot into doing I've worked with people who have 2 PhDs who come to the conclusion that they are following the wrong path. I have so much compassion for this, and I really wanna hold this space for people with this lived experience because we are all a product of the shaping of our cultural conditioning. And if your path has been shaped by feminine conditioning, these are the things that you're expected to do because you're a female, familial conditioning, ethnic conditioning, religious conditioning, the conditioning of your socioeconomic group. And then you go into a field and you get the conditioning of that particular industry or profession to reach a point where you are aware on every level of your being that you have created a life, a career, a path, a lifestyle that doesn't suit you because it was all built on others' expectations of you and for you. I see you and I feel how devastating that feels. I have sat with many people who've had that moment, and it genuinely causes a grief reaction because of everything you've put into it. Because we build an identity around our path. And because we get a lot of approval for doing what's expected of us. All of us do. Whether you are an obliger or not, whether you are a fourth generation physician in your family, whether you became a pharmacist because that's what people from your cultural background are expected to do, the moment that you realize you are not doing what's true for you, you need to take some time with that moment. And most importantly, forgive yourself and forgive anyone who contributed to you making that choice because they did so out of their conditioning. Most of us think we know what we believe, but most of what we actually believe was internalized from other people's beliefs. So, getting to the point where you are able and willing to strip that down and get to the point where you're like, who am I really? What am I here for? And is it too late for me to build an authentic path that is in alignment with my values, my goals, and my gifts? I'm here to tell you it can be done. It absolutely can be done. It takes courage, it takes commitment, it takes a lot of self love, it takes radical self acceptance and radical ownership of your life. Sometimes it takes some hard conversations with other people who think you're crazy, self destructive, and all kinds of other things. But it can absolutely be done. And I think what needs to go into that, whether you decide to change your path in your 40s or 50s, whether you decide to build your own business like I did and like Jessica Lackey did, what you decide to do is less important than the reason you're deciding to do it. I believe that all of us spend far too much time, energy, effort, focus, passion on what we do for a living than almost anything else. If you think about it, you spend more time in your career than on anything else, including raising a family, which most of us are doing simultaneously. So it is important. What you choose is important, and you can uncheck that box and choose again. But I think it's really important that we have the self awareness and we use the critical thinking skills to recognize if we are looking for a magic pill, if we are looking for that one true love, if we have fallen under the seductive spell of the belief that there is one specific thing that you're meant to do and nothing else will do. It's not true. Now, will you be happier, more satisfied, more fulfilled, and probably make a better living if you do something that is aligned with your personal values, your goals for life, and your natural gifts and abilities? Absolutely so. But it's not one thing. There's not one thing out there that you're meant to do, and you just have to go find it because just is no small thing. If your ladder is leaning against the wrong wall, give yourself permission to explore what other walls you might want to lean it against. You don't need to burn your life down, but if you decide to do so, you can forgive yourself for all the energy, time, dollars that you invested in the wrong thing, because I choose to believe that there is no wrong path. Some of us need to take a windy road before we can go in a straight line. Some of us need to experiment. Some of us need to be like serial monogamists. That's how I describe myself now. I was a serial monogamist with several different careers. It took me a long time to realize that working for myself was, is, and always has been the right path for me. But I completely forgive myself for taking a very long time to figure that out because it's my life, it's my journey, and I can give myself permission to forgive myself for any misguided effort in service to this notion that there's one true path. There isn't. There isn't for me, and there isn't for you. If this is a conversation that's interesting to you, and I see from the comments that many of you do find this interesting, I really want to invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn if we are not already connected. at Coach Diane Wingert, and let's have a conversation about this. If you are at this inflection point in your career, what do you need to think? What do you need to feel? What do you need to know? What do you need to decide to be able to take the next step? So I would absolutely love to have that conversation with you. I'm going to bring this conversation to a close. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the wonderful comments and for the effort and attention and energy that you've placed into being here and hearing about this from me. I think this is a really, really important topic. And one of the ways I know that is because of the great resignation. All the people that left the workforce because they were probably doing something based on others' expectations, and they reached a point where that was no longer good enough. So let's keep the conversation going. That's all for now.